Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I hope that members of the opposition, not the opposition, but government, having nourished themselves, can withstand this onslaught this evening. Madam Speaker, again, to put some clarity to what the Attorney General said during his contribution, the Attorney General indicated, and he provided the data, correctly so, that in terms of the murders, the death threats, and the assaults, and so on, that is fine. And he eloquently put it across between 2010 and 2015. But has the murders in relation to prison officers, the assaults, the death threats, and so on, have they stopped? And he failed to provide the statistics for 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19, and so on. And I really hope that in winding up, the Minister of National Security probably could get the statistics, the data from his colleague, and provide us so that we could probably see the comparison and whether the work that they are piggybacking on is bearing fruit as it relates to the concerns of the prisoner officers. And also, he attempted, the Attorney General, in his presentation, to present to Trinidad and Tobago as if prison officers did not get guns and stab vests and so on under the watch of the partnership government. And my colleague, again, the member for St. Augustine, can bear me out on what I am saying during his tenure as the Minister of Justice under the partnership government, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, there are some fundamental issues that we have to look at. And in addressing these issues, I hope that the Minister of National Security and by extension, his colleagues at the level of the cabinet and the implementation stage and so on, can seek to address as we go forward in relation to the well-being of the law enforcement officers, Madam Speaker. Because when he introduced the bill, that is the National Security Minister, we appreciate the fact on this side that it seeks to give more powers to law enforcement officers and so on in the execution of their duties, and also to protect these law enforcement officers from reprisal, members of their families, and so on. And it also inflicts upon it inflicts penalties on citizens who are prepared to break the law, who are prepared probably to collude with gangs and so on, to destabilize the operations of our law enforcement fraternity in Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I hope that in going forward, and probably again in the winding up, because I did not hear the Minister of National Security in piloting this bill, he spoke about errand officers. And people become, or persons become errand probably prior to the recruitment into this service or the divisions, whether it is at prisons, immigration, police, and so on, or during their state of employment or their period of employment in performing their respective responsibilities. But I did not hear the minister tell us what the government is doing in attempting to strengthen what we would call through the recruitment process, the vetting of persons who have applied to become prison officers, yes, or police officers and so on, as the case may be. Because it is a known fact that gangs in Trinidad and Tobago have very long tentacles. Yes. And they can seek to infiltrate different arms of the law enforcement agencies by attempting to get persons employed. And I hope that, and probably in your winding up, you will address this very important issue of the issue of vetting persons who have applied to become part of the law enforcement fraternity in Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker. Because, Madam Speaker, I want to turn to the issue of Clause 2 of the legislation, which seeks to, where Section 6.2 of the Criminal Law Act is amended as it relates to the whole issue, or to address the issue of wasteful employment of police time, Madam Speaker. And the minister said that there has been an increase of false reports through the calling in of what we the 999 system and so on. And in amending the Criminal Act, the fine or the penalty moves from $1,000 and imprisonment for 6 months to $150,000 and imprisonment for 5 years. And Madam Speaker, this clause of the Act must not be seen or must not be used as a deterrent, or citizens must not become fearful because of the penalty in this particular clause and become so intimidated that they do not want to go to police station to make reports. And they may become fearful or just intimidated over the fact that the size of the penalty. And I want to say this because I too, and all members of the opposition, we do not like to see police officers being employed for, in terms of utilizing their time for wasteful reports and so on. We like them to be fighting crime. We want to see them out in the field, tackling the situations that have us as prisoners in our homes and so on. And I want to use a real situation that occurred yesterday, unfortunately, in the constituency of Couva South. And I hope the Minister of National Security is listening attentively to what I have to say. A person who was brutally murdered yesterday by the name of Ravi Ramkisoon from Basta Hall went to the Couva police station approximately 1 week ago. And in his attempt to lodge a report that he was intimidated, he was threatened by someone, police officers at the Couva police station requested of him to provide a name of the alleged person who made the threat. And he said to them that this person allegedly moved into the area in just a couple of months and so on, and he is in possession of an alias of the individual. He does not know the real name of the person on the birth paper, as we would say in Trinidad, a nickname. And they said to him that they cannot take his report based on an alias or a nickname. And he left the police station, and yesterday he was the recipient of 5 bullets, and today driving into his yard in Basta Hall. And today, as a result of that tragic situation, 2 children have lost their father, a wife has lost her husband, she is now a widow, and the stability of an entire law-abiding family,
peaceful community,
and peaceful community, and the peaceful community of Basta Hall has been totally destroyed. And I am saying to you, Mr. Minister, that equally you are asking citizens not to waste the police time. I am asking of you too, and we all have that responsibility, to continue to plead and direct to. We speak about recruitment, we speak about vetting, and also we need to address the issue of training these officers at all across the board, police, fire, immigration, customs, and so on, to have that sense of empathy, duty, and care to understand their role and responsibilities, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, the Minister, again in piloting the amendment that dealt with prohibited, what is called a prohibited article, he alluded it to be contraband and so on. He indicated to us that, and he thanked I think the US government for its donation of dogs, and also he pointed in the direction of the establishment of a multi-agency task force to address the issue of contraband going into the prisons and so on, or the areas that have been demarcated as prisons in Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker. And today, I want to ask the Minister of National Security, because in relation to his developmental, or the ministry's developmental program, as it relates to, and I want to ask him about whether the surveillance systems or the CCTV systems are adequate to cover what we would call, or are they functioning in an effective manner at the Port of Spain prison, the Golden Grove prison, the maximum security prison, the remand prison, the women's prison, the Eastern Correctional Facility, the Carrera Convict Prison, the Tobago Convict Prison, and so on. Because I ask this question, Madam Speaker, in the context of, in 2020, from a developmental program expenditure point of view, $6 million had been allocated for the closed circuit television system within the prison service of the country. And I am asking whether this $6 million will be adequate in providing the surveillance that will be required as it relates to contraband going into the prisons that I just pointed out, or I just named, Madam Speaker. And I asked the further question whether, because, as I said, whether $6 million has been allocated, if it is adequate, and because in 2019, Madam Speaker, $8 million was allocated for this particular project, and only $674,000 was spent, Madam Speaker. And in addition to that, Madam Speaker, whether in these areas do we have the adequate manpower of prison officers manning the 3 shifts in the prisons? And in addition to that, I have heard nothing about scanners, or the use of scanners at these designated areas in relation to the prisons in Trinidad and Tobago. And if we are to really deal with the issue of contraband, and especially the cell phones and the other items that you related to, Mr. Minister, I hope that this issue of the CCTV and also the scanners and so on will be addressed by you. In addition to that, Madam Speaker, we, on this side, we do not want prison officers, customs officers, police, and the list to become errant, delinquent, or corrupt during their tenure of employment. And I have heard you, Minister of National Security, and The Attorney General, too, in his contribution, attempted to tell us that the government has been listening to the concerns of the law enforcement officers in Trinidad and Tobago. And I want to ask you, and probably again, in your winding up, you will tell us whether you have been dialoguing with the Office of the Chief Personnel Officer, not in terms of directly interfering with the collective bargaining process, but at least pleading upon her or making her to understand the urgency of settling outstanding negotiations for law enforcement officers, because law enforcement officers in Trinidad and Tobago, we are in 2019 and they are existing on 2013 salaries.
Speaker, standing order 48-1, please.
Member for Couva South, I have to uphold the objection. This is not, as I caution member for Naprima, this is not a widespread debate about the prison service or the police service. It is about a specific piece of legislation. So unless you can tie what you're saying into the legislation, I ask you to desist from that line and continue with another, embark on another line that is consistent with the piece of legislation that is before us.
Madam Speaker, I am guided, but just to develop what I was saying, or if you would give me the latitude, as we would say.
So much breath that I myself am now breathless, okay? So that I would ask you, if you can't make the connection now, to go on to another point.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, as I was saying, the issue of the, as I said, we do not want, and we on this side do not want officers who are in the service to become delinquent, to become errant, and we are of the opinion that if compensation packages
Speaker,
are properly
standing order
addressed,
48-1, please.
Member for Couva South? Member for Couva South? Could you please move on to your next point, please?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as it relates to the development of the prison service, or the well-being of the prison service, I want to ask the Minister of National Security what has become of the development of a prison management policy. Because in the...
Again, this is not about the prison service. Okay, Member for Couva South, I allowed you to talk about scanners. Okay, even though I think you were stretching the limit, I allowed you to talk about that because it's more or less within the point that legislation alone can't, okay, prevent these things from occurring. So I allowed that, but I'm not going to allow you to talk about remuneration, management policies, and that sort of thing. Next point.
Madam Speaker, I am guided, and I want to go to, because there's a current trend in a number of the clauses in the bill, which defines what is a relative. For example, I am at 11A, 11, as it relates to the repealing and substituting of the following section as it relates to prison officers, and 11.2, a person shall not intentionally take any retaliatory action against a prison officer, relatives, friends, associates, or property of a prison officer, for the purposes on the account of that officer's execution of his duties. And then it goes on to say, for the purposes of subsection 2, relative means in relation to a prison officer, and it defines what a relative is, Madam Speaker. And I hope probably in the government may consider in terms of what is a relative, aunts or uncles, in terms of that definition of what a relative is, because it is applicable in the entire legislation. You would see it in terms of immigration, fire, prisons, and so on. And also, I'm a bit not confused, but searching for how friends will be defined.
Very good point.
And I hope that we could get some clarity in relation to how friends will be defined, friends, associates, or property of a prison officer, as it relates to friends, associates, or property of a police officer, immigration officer, and so on, Madam Speaker. In addition to this, Madam Speaker, as I go on in my contribution, I am, and I have to, I am at section 55(2), not 55(2), but 57(3). This provides, or this amendment provides for the return of an article supplied to a deceased police officer. And in the amendment, it is amended in section 57(3) by deleting the words $5,000 and substituting the words $50,000, and deleting the word 1 year and substituting the words 3 years. And a deceased police officer, Madam Speaker, if he or she does not effectively communicate with his relatives or dependents the importance of returning his gears or his uniforms or the tools of his trade that he was supplied with via the police service of Trinidad and Tobago, they may not know, they may not understand the timelines, and so.
Member for Couva South, your original speaking time is now spent. You're entitled to 15 more minutes to wind up. You may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And thank you, Madam Speaker. And my colleague, San Fernando, is a non-entity in the politics right now, so I wouldn't even engage him at this point in time.
Here is the chair. So I would ask you, Member for Couva South, not to be led astray and continue your conversation this way. You're wasting some of your precious minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The PNM will never mislead me. But more importantly, as I said, during and I would hope that from a communication point of view through the public affairs unit of the police service and so on, that there would be this effective communication between the police service and the relatives and dependents of deceased officers, so that they would not fall victim to this clause in the legislation, because we need to display a sense of empathy, care, duty, and responsibility at a time. And sometimes I think that placing the responsibility on the relatives is probably an onerous one, and I see Toko Sandigrande is listening attentively. Probably that will be also considered from an education point of view. And Madam Speaker, Section 60, the amendment deals with also the refusal to assist a police officer in the execution of his duties. And I remember the Attorney General in his contribution said or attempted to point my colleague, the member for Naparima, about the history and not understanding that it is in the law. And we accept the fact, Attorney General, that it is in the law in terms of a citizen's responsibility to assist a police officer in the execution of his or her duty. But how many really know of that responsibility and the implications if someone does not assist? What is the penalty? And all I'm saying that it is moving from $10,000 to $50,000, and it is moving from 1 year to 3 years, possibly in imprisonment if you are convicted. And at the end of the day, I think that we need to look at a strong public education campaign so that, again, citizens will be reminded of their duties and responsibilities, because in this Gova season, Madam Speaker, to be subjected to a fine of $50,000 or for 3 years imprisonment at a time when there is a number of job losses, income is hard to come by and so on. And there's a kind of apprehension in the society. Sometimes a legitimate police officer may come knocking at your door, and because of the state of the country, the state of crime, you are afraid to go out to engage that officer. You may not even, an officer may be, again, very lawfully, from a lawful point of view, driving his vehicle, using his siren, instruct you to pull over. And you refuse because you do not, there are cases where, numerous cases and examples in this country, where persons have robbed, they have kidnapped, they have held up law-abiding citizens using police uniforms and so on. And all I am saying to the Minister of National Security, that we must properly educate, we must properly reinforce this particular area of the legislation so that persons could understand their duties and responsibilities, Madam Speaker. And again, I want to, because for me, again, it is ambiguous, it is a bit contradictory and so on, as it relates to section 61(1), for example, where again the penalty is increased from $15,000 to $150,000, and from 1 year to 5 years imprisonment. And a penalty where a person knowingly harbors or entertains a police officer while he is on duty, sells or gives him intoxicating liquor to a police officer while on duty, or induces a police officer to commit a breach. Now, this may be clear in an establishment, for example, if an officer is in his uniform. But what about plainclothes police officers? A plainclothes police officer, because of attempting to gain from an intelligence point of view and so on, undercover work, he or she may go, rightfully so, into an establishment, and the unsuspecting barman, barwoman, whoever is running the establishment will not ask for an ID card, or I want to see if you are a police officer and so on, because the police officer too, if he or she is undercover in terms of carrying out he or his responsibility, they will not want to blow their identity. And I'm saying that to say we have to look at it and treat with it from a plainclothes point of view, and how this particular issue must be addressed, Madam Speaker. And, Madam Speaker, also from the point of view of the fire services, because, again, the Clause 6 of the bill focuses on the amendment to the Fire Service Act, Chapter 3505. And we all understand that firefighting is a very serious responsibility. It's a very dangerous one, and it is a very onerous one, Madam Speaker. And the bill attempts, or Clause 6 of the bill, attempts to repeal Section 41(2) to increase the penalty where a person willfully assaults, threatens, obstructs, resists, or interferes with a fire officer while he is on duty for firefighting. And also, Section 43(4), in order to increase the penalty where a person willfully assaults, threatens, obstructs, resists, or interferes with a fire officer in the exercise of his duties in respect of public premises and so on. And I could go on and on in terms of what the amendments attempts to achieve here, Madam Speaker. And I don't know, based on the penalties that is being proposed, Mr. Minister of National Security, if you could provide some data where persons have actually attempted to obstruct and so on, as it relates to firefighters in the operations of their duties and so on, or in the fulfillment of their duties. And that would have guided you in terms of drafting the increase in penalties and so on, as it relates to the operation of fire officers, Madam Speaker. And so I'm moving now, I've broadly dealt with the issue of the fire officers. And quickly, Madam Speaker, how much time I have again? 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Then I want to briefly spend a little time on a couple of the amendments as it relates to custom officers, Madam Speaker. Because Clause 7D increases the penalties for interfering with customs gear. And the amendment deals with Section 203 of the Customs Act. And again, like police officers, if persons are interfering with customs uniform and custom gears and impersonating or attempting to impersonate customs officers in the clearance of containers or and containers may have guns, arms, and ammunition, equipment that could be used in the pursuit of terrorist activities and so on. All these things are laudable, and we on this side understand our role and responsibility in supporting the legislation. But, Madam Speaker, as it relates to Clause 7E, which deals with the power of custom officers to stop carriage, and this amendment deals with Section 207 of the Customs Act, the penalty has increased. However, do officers have sufficient equipment to stop the carriage on via sea and so on? And in addition to that, Madam Speaker, Clause 7F deals with increased penalties for officers taking unauthorized fees. I do not know if the Minister, again, is in possession of data which will guide us to say or indicate how many customs officers have been charged for fraud over the last 10 years. And are these new suggested penalties consistent with the general laws of the land in keeping with fraud and so on? And is there a code of conduct in customs which provides guidelines and so on for the acceptance Madam Speaker, of gifts. And I am saying to the government, they have brought this piece of legislation, fine. But officers across the board, Madam Speaker, from a law enforcement point of view, in the pursuit of their duties, must have the full support of the executive and the judiciary. Because if errand officers are brought before the law, they must also have that confidence that they will get an opportunity to be heard from under the judicial system of the country, Madam Speaker. And the government needs to be prepared to, in addition, to address the issues of training and manpower and vacancies also in each of these divisions.
A point from which we had departed. We had agreed to depart from that point. So you have a few, maybe 1 more minute left. Let's don't waste it with my jumping up to pull you back on the right track. Continue, Member for Cooper South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So at the end of the day, Madam Speaker, we on this side we are of the opinion that laws and penalties cannot win the war on crime alone. There is the need for support systems, there is need for mechanisms that must provide the opportunity for officers at all levels to understand that they have fulfilled their duties with a sense of pride, passion, and commitment to Trinidad and Tobago, so that we could all exist in a society that we do not have to live with fear and apprehension at the hands of criminals and prisoners in our very own homes and communities. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Dabity O'Meara.
Pleasant. Good evening, Madam Speaker. Thank you for this opportunity to make my contribution to this miscellaneous provision, Law Enforcement Bill 2019. Madam Speaker, law enforcement is a dangerous business. Many times, law enforcement officers face more dangerous situations than military officers in operations. The military uses the principle of overwhelming force. They use a 3-to-1 ratio. And whenever the ratio drops below that, the military retreats and goes into the defense. It is not so with law enforcement officers. Military will send against a section, a platoon, against a platoon, a company, and it goes up the line, against a company, a battalion, brigade, division. But once the odds drop, the military retreats and goes to the defense. Military, when they engage in other military, they have different uniforms. There are different distances between units, and there's rules of engagement. There is the Geneva Convention. Law enforcement, unfortunately, does not have these principles in which to deal by. Many times it's just 2 policemen against criminals. They can call for backup, but a lot of time backup takes a while to come to the assistance of the policemen on the ground. They are in close quarters with other people, the criminals. Sometimes it's difficult to identify who the criminals are or who from the normal citizens. Sometimes women and children are involved. Sometimes they may have hidden weapons. Sometimes they may have snipers and may put ambushes against the law enforcement officers. Sometimes crowd gather. We live in a society now where you can get a flash mob by simply sending messages on WhatsApp and other social media using the cell phone technology. And as I listened to a member from Kura South, I realized that he was stretching a lot of things, a lot of concepts that he dealt with, for instance, refusing to assist a police officer. But what the law that the Minister of National Security is introducing is one where increased fines and increased imprisonment can act as a deterrent against people who would seek to endanger, threaten law enforcement officers in the carrying out of their duties. And a lot of that is involved when you have flash mobs and crowds. There's a video going around on social media where they say the police wicked. Police going to arrest somebody, and you're hearing in the background, the police wicked. This one getting involved, that one getting involved, etc. But if they know that there are sizable fines and increased imprisonment for this type of behavior, it will act as a deterrent to those who want to interfere in police officers in the execution of their duties. Madam Speaker, this bill addresses basically in three different areas. Address the criminals as the lawbreakers. It addresses the various officers in law enforcement. And it addresses certain aspects of the reality that we are in today in terms of technology dealing with law enforcement. Clause 2, Madam Speaker, the Criminal Law Act. There are increase in the fines and imprisonment. And we are introduced to the wasteful employment of police time. Again, the member from Couva South, in his contribution, tried to blur what the Minister of National Security is trying to achieve. But what the minister, in terms of wasting police time, is speaking about fake kidnappings. You have people who, for money, a young man recently, I believe, was arrested in Guyana, where he faked his kidnapping to get money from his own family. Yeah. Wasting police time. Police time that can be, police investigators that can be used for a more meaningful task is have to go after him and deal with investigating his fake kidnapping. And of course, fake robbery, fake assault. All these areas where you waste police time is what this piece of legislation is seeking to deal with. And again, a deterrent of increased fines, increased imprisonment, will let somebody think twice rather than going after your family's money and faking your own kidnapping, as the case may be. The member for Couva South went on in all different areas. He included training of law enforcement officers. And he was rambling on and on and on. Closed circuit TVs, he talked about scanners, manpower. He reached down to outstanding negotiation, prison management policy, remuneration vacancies. He went all around and wrong and wrong and wrong. But the Minister of National Security, seeking to deal with law enforcement officers, singled out different law enforcement officers. For instance, prison officers. A prison is a closed system. And we have a difficulty in dealing with closed systems. Our body is a closed system. The only thing that gets into our body is what we put into it. I know the member for Lavantil West has a thing going with me in terms of what we eat, in terms of meat and so forth. But What you put into your system determines what happens in your system. And if you follow the good eating habits and so forth, your body, although it will get old with time, will remain healthy. Same to the prison system. It's a closed system. It's a closed system. And if certain things are allowed in by prison officers, then you get problems within the prison system. There was a major prison break a few years ago where a policeman was killed. And the guys came out with grenades and guns and so forth from within the prison. Somebody had to bring it in. I'm sure it was not the legit prison officer. So some rogue prison officer would have been involved in bringing in these contraband and getting it to the prisoners to carry out a prison break. So if you interfere with the closed system, then you get problems. And this legislation not only addresses the criminals, but it addresses the law enforcement officers. And the term that the Minister of National Security used was expecting these officers to move to a higher standard. Whether it's a prison officer, fire officer, immigration officer, custom officer, police officer, we expect them to operate at a higher standard. So trafficking, accepting a bribe, and this new concept that we're using, tipping off. And the Minister of National Security explains tipping off as interfering with an investigation by disclosing to any other person information which is likely to prejudice the investigation. Now, we know that the police service depends on informers. Informers in terms of giving them information that they can use in terms of to bring into intelligence, to nab criminals, as the case may be. But on the converse, we do not want prison officers, police officers, anyone doing an investigation and somebody getting wind of this, what he's doing, and passing on that information to somebody else, which can jeopardize the investigation. So then, once again, the Minister of National Security is increasing the fines, increasing the imprisonment, so that acts as a deterrent. So rather than tip off someone as to what is going on with the law enforcement officer, you realize that, look, I am not going to spend that time in prison by giving out this information. So it acts as a deterrent. In Clause 4, the Police Service Act comes into play. And again, for the criminals and for the police officers, we see an increase in fines and imprisonment. Anyone who assault, obstruct, resist, impersonate, or threaten a police officer is liable to once arrested and tried, to increase fines and imprisonment. And of course, we are expecting, like the prison officers, the police officers would operate at a higher standard. So we are telling them, you cannot sell, transfer, loan your arms, outside here, people are police soldiers, renting out their weapons. So a man will go and put on a walk because the police rent his weapon to him, and he can put on the walk, and then afterwards the police collect the weapon back, or the prison officer, or the soldier, as the case may be. So we are increasing the fines, courtesy of the Minister of National Security, and imprisonment if you are found guilty of doing any type of this activity. It also goes to clothing. Okay, just last night or yesterday, the Commissioner of Police in a press interview showed some men who were caught in the act of impersonating police officers with the intention of doing some kind of criminal act, as the case may be. And I hope by the time the trial come about, that this law is enforced with the help of our friends on the other side, so that they will get the full brunt of the law for the activity that they're involved in. And of course, it includes improper possession. Now again, the member for Couva South was stretching a lot of things. Because he seemed to not understand when they say improper possession, that given our society as it is, policemen, prison officers, soldiers, all law enforcement people have a lot of relationships that, in a sense, is not above board. They may have their family, but then they may have something on the outside that they may spend time by sleep with, as the case may be. And something might happen to him. And this person ends up in possession of police uniform, or prison uniform, or soldier's uniform, or as the case may be. Right? And they may tend to want to use it some way or the other. I agree with him when he said that there should be some type of education for the population, that if you are in possession of a serviceman's equipment or his uniform, that you have the responsibility to turn it into the nearest police station, as the case may be, rather than try to seek, to use it some way or the other. So this is what the law is dealing with and treading on, rather than, the member for Couva South trying to stretch it, not to understand what the law meant by friend. It meant by friend, it might mean that somebody who he has a relationship with. I won't say go and say common law, but he has a relationship with. And that person might be in possession of his associate there, might be in possession of his equipment or his uniform. And of course, for the police officer, when we are seeking to let them rise to a higher standard, we deal with bribery, that they're not supposed to take bribes, as the case may be. And the different clauses are, of course, 5 deals with the immigration officers, and the law again, with the fine and imprisonment deals with, as people who are assaulting, obstructing, as the case may be. And of course, tipping off in terms of the immigration officer. But they also, in terms of the immigration officer, we look at making or issuing false documents. And I know there is a market out there for false documents, false IDs, and all sorts of other kind of methods of making you legitimate and operating within the false qualifications as well. But that is above the pay grade of the immigration officer. And Clause 6 with the Fire Service Act. Again, the law, this law enforcement bill, follows up a pattern that the Minister of National Security put in place, dealing with increased fines and imprisonment, assault, threat, obstructing the fire service officer, and false fire alarm. I knew one time I was, and thankfully good sense prevailed. I was in the ARIMA Corporation, which was above the FCB, and a young man that his father brought into the office saw the fire alarm when the father was passing and pulled it. Of course, the fire alarm went off. Everybody had to vacate the building, not only upstairs, but FCB had to vacate the building downstairs, caused a whole lot of problems for people who went to do the legitimate banking and so forth. But good sense prevailed, and we understood that it was an accident by a young man. But I also know that a politician at that same venue also set off the fire alarm. Who is now putting himself up as a candidate in Tobago, deliberately set off the alarm in that same building and caused a whole lot of problems. Which, Watson Duke was that gentleman who set off the fire alarm. And with this increased fines and imprisonment, it means that he would have just add another charge to what he is. His long list of charges. Set it off a fire alarm. So we know that that is also against the law. Of course, we deal with tipping off. Anybody in an investigation by a fire officer, you're not allowed to tip off, and fire officers are not allowed to accept bribes as well. And it goes on to the Customs Act, Clause 7, which deals with the Customs Act and the increased fines and imprisonment. But also in terms of customs, they have added the fact that their families can be threatened, so retaliatory action against family members is frowned upon. And the good Minister of National Security has covered that. So this is a good piece of legislation. I'm glad to hear that those on the other side will support this bill. The normal speakers, the member for Naparima and the member for Couva South, just stretched out the debate, and I hope who follows me will not stretch it out into the wee hours of this afternoon to tonight when you are going to support the legislation. For once, give the congratulations to the Minister of National Security on a good piece of legislation that will benefit both all the law enforcement officers, but will also send a fear into the criminals by the fact that they will be given stiffer fines and longer imprisonment if they continue in their life to make the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago unhappy and cause danger to become a norm in Trinidad and Tobago. So, Madam Speaker, I thank you for this opportunity to make this short contribution to this magnificent piece of legislation by the Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I thank you for the opportunity to make a short contribution to this particular bill. This bill seeks to amend 6 pieces of legislation, and these 6 pieces of legislation set out the legal parameters for the functioning of police officers, prison officers, immigration officers, fire service officers, customs officers. And the new law is very much a two-way street, Madam Speaker, because by the changes it makes, it introduces new rules and stronger penalties against officers in the breach. But it also seeks to protect them from citizen aggression in the execution of their duties. And that's why I said it was a two-way street, because the bill does take into account the general lawlessness that has come to characterize the society in which we live and which seems to be a growing phenomenon, not just here but elsewhere. And the lawlessness comes, on the one hand, from rogue and undesirable elements that exist in institutions that are meant to be institutions of law enforcement. And the member for W, Mira mentioned it in passing. But it also has to do, this general lawlessness, with disrespect for law and for the enforcement of law. by citizens of society who often indicate by their behavior that they would rather not be circumscribed in any way whatsoever. Now, the bill consists of 7 clauses. It was first introduced in the House on June the 7th, 2019, and we are debating it now 5 months or so later, so that there can be no legitimate claim of urgency for the bill. But we in the opposition do appreciate the value of the measures in the bill. Now, I want to focus here because it is an important part of the bill. I want to focus on immigration and customs, because we often deal with the police. I might mention something, but I wouldn't really deal with it. My colleague from Naparima addressed the issue of prisons. The minister addressed the issue of the connected currents of the bill for all disciplines of law enforcement included in this bill. And I want to deal with the amendments to the Immigration Act and also to the Customs Act, Madam Speaker. This bill increases the penalties for making or issuing any false documents, certificates, or declarations. And this, in the particular case, I'm talking here of immigration officers. And it also addresses the issue of accepting any bribe or other remuneration or benefit. So in the case of customs officers, in the case of immigration officers, as it does for the other categories in the bill, fire officers, police, prisons, customs, etc., it addresses very frontally corruption issues. The fines and the jail terms are now much steeper, depending on whether it is a summary conviction or an indictable conviction. And these fines can range from $250,000 to $500,000. And on conviction, a person can be jailed for 10 to 15 years. So in this bill, therefore, the immigration officer, and I'm dealing with the immigration officer here, it is also true for the other categories of officers. But in this particular bill, the immigration officer is being held to account. And this is in keeping with what the Minister of National Security said in his opening. I think he said that this bill was to hold officers up to a higher standard, as well as to protect officers of law enforcement. But the bill also targets any citizen who will, and I quote from the bill, who willfully assaults, threatens, obstructs, resists, or interferes with an immigration officer. And this is also so for the other officers in the performance of his duties under this act or the regulations. Now here, the immigration officer is protected from the citizen, or I suspect an immigrant who might have the opportunity to interface with him or her, and who in any way, that's to say the immigrant or the citizen, wishes to prevent him from doing his work, Madam Speaker. In the instance of the immigration officer, but also for all other categories of officers covered by the bill, the issue of tipping off becomes a crime that is introduced in this bill for the first time. And tipping off, of course, I mean, I don't know what is the legal arrangement, but I understand it to be giving someone information that might interfere with the process of investigation or the course of administration of justice. So we also have, in addition to that, we have the issue of resistance to immigration officers, that is to say by the citizen or the immigrant, and the threat of violence to their families if you are dissatisfied or angry or whatever it is. Now, these fines and jail terms for accepting a bribe, there are also fines and jail terms for accepting a bribe and for abusing office. We have no problems whatsoever, Madam Speaker, with keeping immigration officers honest, nor do we have a problem with increasing the penalties for dishonesty. The same fines and jail terms, pretty high, apply for impersonating an immigration officer. Now, the way this is put in the legislation is a little awkward to my view, because this could only be targeting, this could not possibly be targeting immigration officers or police or firemen or prison officers. It would have to be targeting citizens who seek to impersonate an immigration officer, as I'm dealing with that, or a policeman or whatever. And so it is meant to protect the genuine immigration officer, and therefore the genuine policeman or the genuine prison officer, against abuse of the use of the uniform, either by being stolen and so on. Now, the minister, when he spoke, talked about the rental of uniforms and as well as the rental of guns, and that might be a possibility. But I do think that what the target is in this is against a citizen who might choose to use a uniform in order to commit a crime of some kind. Now, I want to also raise a couple of issues with the Customs Act, which is amended here, similar to what is mentioned here in immigration. In amending the Customs Act, again, the issue addressed is how to protect the officer from assault or interference with his work or her work, protect him from action against relatives by citizens who may feel aggrieved. Again, you're protecting the family, as in the case of police prisoners, prison officers. The issue of tipping off, giving information that you shouldn't, and protecting the officer in the conduct of his or her duties. Now, I'm addressing the issue of immigration officers and customs officers, not only because they appear in the bill, but because I want to make the case, as the bill actually does, that they are not, make the case because in including them in this way, I want to make the case that they are not just law enforcement officers, but they represent these two, customs and immigration. They represent, Madam Speaker, border security for our island country. Now, while the police is involved in keeping the peace and maintaining law and order on land, and we thank them for their service to the country, while the fire service prevents and outs fires across the land, and we also thank them for their service to the country. And while prison officers address the incarcerated population and seek to manage them, contain them, isolate them from the rest of the population, and rehabilitate some of them, and we again thank them for their service to the country, the immigration officers protect Trinidad and Tobago from those coming from other countries who enter this country. They keep tabs on the entry and exit of our own citizens leaving and returning to the country. They manage the legitimate entry and exit of visiting travelers tourists, we might call them, while they also are responsible and accountable for illegal immigrants in our country. That is to say, they have the capacity to chase them, to find them, etc., as the case might be. The Immigration Division also renews passports, and they issue passports to citizens. Now, we take the issue of a passport for granted, but this is a very, very important document. Not only is it an identification, an identity document, it is really, a passport is a freedom document. It gives you the opportunity to move in the world as a citizen of the world temporarily, knowing that you are rooted in a particular country. And therefore, this is a very, very serious responsibility and obligation that should not be treated lightly. And they also detain, that is to say, immigration officers, illegal immigrants. Sometimes they legitimize their stay or make arrangements for deportation after a hearing, as the case might be. They handle cases of asylum seekers and refugees. And with the recent and ongoing crisis in Venezuela and the large increase in the number of Venezuelans in our country, the jurisdictional reach and responsibilities of the Immigration Department have become clearer, on our own country's reliance, heavy reliance, on immigration as a major source of border control has intensified. So immigration and immigration officers are very important, and they are very critical to the sovereignty and the national security of the country. And I want to emphasize that fact because they really do guard the borders. They guard the borders. Customs officers have a correspondingly connected role. And I want to emphasize that. They guard the borders. And they are very, very important again. I want to emphasize. Now, immigration and the immigration officers and the department, they are very important also for something else that we sometimes overlook, which is that they are important for statistical purposes. This is the agency, immigration officers and the immigration department, that should provide statistical data on non-nationals residing in our country to the Central Statistical Office. Recently, and for growing in importance, I think over the last decade, two decades, we have understood not just the importance of statistics, but the Central Statistical Office and the National Statistical System. But the Immigration Department is a collector and collator of statistics, and the CSO or any national institution for statistics depends on them and would depend on them for accurate information. And this role in statistics, Madam Speaker, is critical for establishing the makeup of residents in our country and the number of citizens and non-citizens and their status residing in the country. It is the most important basic information about a country. How many people you have, how many are citizens, how many are not, and where do the non-citizens come from, and what is their status in your country. It is one of the most critical pieces of information in the management of a nation. So accuracy of information is essential for managing any situation, and population data are very, very important and vital. The Immigration Department, Madam Speaker, also collects and collates data on tourist arrivals and on tourist departures.
Madam Speaker, Standing Order 48-1, please.
Yes.
I allowed you some leeway because I think you were trying to ground the importance of immigration
Yes.
into your discussion. But it is almost 20 minutes, and therefore I think you need to quickly tie up what you're doing with the bill. Okay? Because I have to uphold that objection on relevance. Okay? Please proceed.
I really have to find my center. Because I don't think so at all. I was making the point that this is an important institution that basically guards the boundaries of this country. And I was going to make the point, Madam Speaker, that with all of this critical role, I mean, how could we legislate for an institution if we do not acknowledge the critical role that it plays in the society and therefore the connectivity with other things? You know, so
We acknowledge it. Go ahead.
Let's show a little tolerance. Member for Caroni
Yes.
Central. What I did is acknowledge that you spent 20 minutes letting us appreciate the importance of immigration. What I'm saying is, I think you've reached the point where you need to ground all the, or affix all that foundation you laid to what we're doing. Okay? That's all I've said. All right? So that if you could start tying it up now, I think we'll appreciate even better what your contribution is.
But, Madam Speaker, I mean, I could take the bill and I could go through the clauses. I could take the bill and go through the clauses, but I was making, I hoped, a coherent argument about the role of immigration and consequently customs in a certain role in the society, and therefore the importance of this two-way street type of legislation which protects the institution as well as protects the institution from society. Madam Speaker, I will proceed. There is a clause here, 41B, Madam Speaker, which claims, or which reads, 41B1, it's on page 26 of the legislation. A person who assaults, threatens, obstructs, or resists, or aids or incites any other person to assault, threaten, obstruct, or resist an immigration officer in the execution of his duty. And it goes on to mention all the, not just the immigration officer himself, but also for purposes of subsection 2 relative means, and it mentions his parent or step-parent, his spouse, cohabitant or fiancé, his child, etc. And this is a clause that is repeated in the legislation for the protection of the officer and his family. Now, this is something that has arisen in the context of what I said before, which is to say that we've gotten to a point where there's a kind of lawlessness which has engaged both the institutions that are meant to be law enforcement as well as the citizenry at large that conduct their business and go about their lives in the society. And I don't think we should have a situation in which the families of people who are applying the law and executing the law should be threatened in this way. So this is something that we on this side, the United National Congress, strongly support, because we feel that this protection is necessary. And the member for Dabadi O'Meara made 2 points of importance in his presentation. He said, first of all, he made a comparison between the police and the military. And he mentioned that the military engaged according to certain rules of military combat. So, and because of that, and because of the fact that those rules do not apply for police officers, he said that because the police officers do not have the comfort of those protocols, their profession is in fact a very dangerous profession. And I think we can say the same of we can say the same of prison officers and perhaps other officers as well. But he said something that was not correct. And I wouldn't do anything about it except to say that a prison system, Madam Speaker, is not a closed system. A prison system is what is known as a total institution. A total institution applies not just to a prison system, but a hospital. It applies also to a mental institution. It applies to any institution in which you have a body of people who relate in a certain way and who are cut off from the rest of the society for a certain period of time. So it is possible to think of a school, for instance, as a total institution. And the reason I say that it is not a closed system, and he used the closed system to explain the body is not a closed system, because closed systems die, open systems thrive. And the reason the body thrives is because you take in and breathe out oxygen. And the reason open systems thrive, whether they are institutions or not, and only open institutions can thrive, is because you have the flow of information in and out. A total institution, Madam Speaker, which is a concept developed by the sociologist Goffman, I forget his name, I think it was, I can't remember, I may have written it down when he was speaking. I can't remember his first name, I know it was E. But Goffman did this, I think, in the late 60s, early 70s, and he talked about a total institution. And the reason I'm raising it is because a total institution allows you to control the flow of information in and out, which is the critical point in the prison issue. And the Attorney General was correct when he said that a prison has to be a prison. It cannot be a place in which you have telephones and you are making calls outside and calling shots, and so on. And therefore, those things in the bill which seek to address those things, I find palatable and reasonable and things that are worthy of support. Irvin Goffman. Irvin Goffman was the name of the person. E-R-V-I-N-G. So, I was going on to the customs issue, and the same things that apply there apply to customs and apply to immigration. And the similarity between customs and immigration is that they also control the borders. Because when you come in, whether you bring in legitimate material, or whether you bring in guns, or whether you bring in drugs, the customs are the border patrol that allows you either to come in or to intervene to prevent you from coming in. So while immigration deals with the people, customs deal with the things. And it is important, therefore, if we understand that police are important, prison officers are important, customs officers are important, immigration officers are important, that we would try to create the conditions in which we can have a better society by lifting the standards by which they operate, by protecting them, and also by creating the conditions in the society where people would be less prone to be aggressive towards them. Now, I am still haunted, Madam Speaker, when I see a bill having to do with issues such as these and matters involving crime and criminal behavior by the fact that we had a situation in the country 2 years ago. I raised it in the Parliament here, in which a hand grenade was found on a beach in Calibe. And since that time, and the coverage of that time, we have not found out whether the bag which had that hand grenade had other hand grenades in it. We did not find the person who had the bag of hand grenades, and we have not been able to find any of the information
Member for
related to...
Cary Central, your original time is now spent. You have 15 more minutes
Yes.
to wrap up.
And we've not been able to connect that to anything that is happening in the society until one day something might happen or something might explode, and we may then trace it to something like that particular event in Calibe. And we, of course, had another incident in that very same bay in which not just a bomb was shown, that is to say a hand grenade, but lives were actually lost. So, Madam Speaker, I wish to express my unhappiness about the fact that I prepared properly to give a constructive contribution in this debate. And through various interventions, I've been thwarted in that objective. And I make that abundantly clear in my statement here today. I will ignore the comments on the other side, and I will say that this bill here is a reasonable bill for what it seeks to achieve. That is to say, to strengthen the institutions of law enforcement and to protect protect the institutions and the people in the institutions of law enforcement from harm, including their families. But I also want to say, like everything else, when you increase the power and authority of people with institutional power and people who have the power of law enforcement, and you increase the obligations for good behavior on the part of the citizens who must interface with these entities for law enforcement, you somehow alter the balance of the relations. And I simply want to mention that. It is an important concept because it is not like police officers allegations have not been made against police officers for abuse, or that they could not, in a circumstance in which an immigration officer or a customs officer is exercising his authority or power, or her authority or power, not be abusive to the ordinary citizen who now finds himself in a situation where if he misbehaves, if he objects, if he quarrels, he may very well find himself not only addressing the issue that he came for in the first place, but he or she may find themselves in a situation in which they now have to face a charge under this existing law. And I want to say that while it is good to increase the authority and the protection for the law enforcement entities, it is also important to understand the alteration of the balance of power between the powerful and the powerless, notwithstanding what I said about the society becoming lawless. And Madam Speaker, I want to close by saying that throughout my entire presentation here on this floor, in this instance, there has been constant chattering on the other side, and I have been subject to that abuse constantly without Speaker's intervention.
Sandy Granny.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for recognizing me to take part in this debate. An act to amend the Criminal Law Act, Chapter 1004, the Prisons Act, Chapter 1301, the Police Service Act, Chapter 1501, the Immigration Act, Chapter 1801, the Fire Services Act, Chapter 3550, and the Customs Act, Chapter 7801. Madam Speaker, I am really delighted to stand here this afternoon because I have spent over 30 years in the police service, and this bill seeks to respond to many management issues that I would have faced in the police service, from a constable to an assistant commissioner of police, Madam Speaker. And this bill, which was introduced by the Minister of National Security earlier this year, seeks to increase existing penalties and introduce new provisions with respect to offenses committed by and against law enforcement officers in the execution of their duties. And Madam Speaker, the term law enforcement officers refers to police officers, prisons officers, fire officers, immigration officers, and officers within the meaning of the Customs Act, Chapter 7801. Madam Speaker, during my service, there were many things that we spoke about. We had our own languages. And one of the terms which I grew accustomed to is, to whom much is given, much is expected. And Madam Speaker, this legislation protects, and it also holds to a higher standard all the officers I spoke about a while ago. And Madam Speaker, the Ministry of National Security, led by a most efficient, illustrious, and young, energetic minister, is charged with the primary responsibility for ensuring the security of the land and the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And this is done through the maintenance of law and order. And the law enforcement arm of the ministry includes personnel of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, persons, immigration, fire service, in the promotion of national security through law enforcement, and they are in fact crucial arms of the justice system. So, Madam Speaker, any legislation, policy, and guidelines intended to improve the operational effectiveness of our law enforcement agencies may subsequently lead to a relieving of the pressure placed on the justice system. Madam Speaker, earlier this year, based in part on the concern and safety of our prisons officers, there was a public outcry to the rise in the numbers of murders and attacks of prisons officers. An amendment to the Prisons Act, Chapter 1301, were proposed. In the spirit of inclusion, Madam Speaker, and with the understanding that other members of the law enforcement officers were just as deserving of similar protection under the law, amendments were also proposed to the Police Service Act, Chapter 1501, the Immigration Act, Customs Act, and the Fire Service Act. And Madam Speaker, it is expected that these amendments that we debated here today will eradicate major drawbacks identified and enhance the protection of all officers of the aforementioned law enforcement agencies that I spoke about a while ago. Madam Speaker, the purpose of this bill is twofold. It also addresses the need to deter corrupt officers in each of these agencies, and it is the government's opinion that the officers must always be held to a higher standard of conduct and trust, and failure to adhere to such standards or to attract with it penalties that clearly demonstrates the nation's abhorrence of misconduct in police officers, public officers, especially when the misbehavior has the detrimental potential of undermining the public's confidence in the nation's protective services. Madam Speaker, earlier this afternoon, we would have heard the member of Naparima speaking about he had to think twice before he gave help to a police officer while in execution of their duty. And this legislation seeks to create the opportunity where we will have police officers responding in a particular manner which give rise to increased public confidence. And if we increase public confidence in the citizenry, then no citizen should really stand and say that they have to think twice, especially, Madam Speaker, an honorable member of this House, whom we all seek to hold at higher standards. Just 2 weeks ago, I heard somebody define what is an honorable person. Who is an honorable person? Are we worthy of calling ourselves honorable? We need to do certain things in a particular fashion and express ourselves in a particular fashion and notion when we speak about public issues, Madam Speaker. So this afternoon, I want to just remind this honorable House, I too, as a police officer, Madam Speaker, I could remember, as a former police officer, I remember as a young inspector, I was on duty and I saw a particular incident happening to the elderly lady. And I stood my ground and I approached a young man and I started to tell him that he's under arrest. And Madam Speaker, the young man looked at me and said, "You could arrest me?" Gone are the days long ago, people used to say, "I want a woman police to hold me tight, tight, tight." But Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, that no longer exists. It would seem that no longer exists because, we see situations where, Madam Speaker, police officers being assaulted. We see, Madam Speaker, in May of this year, 2 police officers were assaulted by a group of persons in Santa Flora. The Daily Express, May 5th, 1st, 2019. The police officers were kicked and cuffed by residents as they attempted to arrest a suspect in the chopping of 3 members of a Santa Flora family. So, Madam Speaker, gone are the days, and a woman police was involved in that. Gone are the days, Madam Speaker, when we could really say, men used to say, I want a woman police to hold me tight, tight, tight. No longer. So, therefore, Madam Speaker, this legislation we discussed here today, we debated here today, and I want to compliment every single speaker who went before me, because all the clauses were discussed in totality, and I want to even compliment those on the other side for agreeing to support this piece of legislation, because it is a worthy piece of legislation. And I can say, Madam Speaker, in all my service that I gave to this country as a police officer, all the points discussed here and these clauses here, they are very relevant and they are needed, especially the point with the tipping. The additional point. I want to compliment the Minister of National Security for recognizing the need and the urgency of putting this into this clause and bringing it before this Honorable House to be debated here today. And from listening to everyone this afternoon and this afternoon here, we all supported all the clause put forward for this legislation. So, Madam Speaker, there isn't really much more I can add to this debate, but to just compliment the member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, for his diligent work that he gave to, ensuring that all these clauses would have been met. And, Madam Speaker, these are things that didn't happen yesterday. They have been there, and these are clauses that were required to be placed before this House to bring into legislation. And I want to say that this government is getting the job done. And I want to compliment this government for really standing and, ensuring that the job is well done. The Attorney General, that I always am in your corner, recognizing you for, your contributions and recognizing that, we have so much issues in the court and that, matters in the court take a very long period of time to come to its finality. And the particular clause which deal with wasting of police time, you know too well that this is a matter which is, this could be of great help in the court, because when we have these matters not coming to court, because it would act as the clause itself, we expect the clause to be brought about as a deterrent. If it acts as a deterrent, it would mean that these matters would not come to court, and the benefits will be that it would free up a lot of time in the court to have other serious matters being heard. So, Madam Speaker, I stood here this afternoon really to support and to lend my piece of experience in the field, and to also bring to this House the fact that it is a good management tool. This government has provided all the law enforcement agencies with a piece of management tool which could make for greater effectiveness and greater efficiency in the police service, in the prison service, fire service, customs, immigration. And so, Madam Speaker, I wish to sit by reigniting the words, to whom much is given, much is expected, and I expect that our law enforcement agencies stand to this bill when it will be laid, it will be completed upon this debate today and become law. And I think that it would really open the doors to have a more effective and efficient law enforcement agency within Trinidad and Tobago, and assist in bringing down the amount of criminality and crime in our country, Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, may I take the opportunity to thank you for recognizing me and to congratulate those who have spoken on the bill on opposition side, and again, reiterate our commitment to support this bill. Madam Speaker, for the past couple of years, the legislation that has been brought before the Parliament with respect to crime fighting has always focused upon increasing fines or increasing penalties. And despite that, we have an increase in the number of crimes being committed. We have an increase in the number of murders committed. So I wonder sometimes whether there is any real connection between us increasing all these fines or increasing the penalties and getting the crime rate down. But having said that, I want to put on record our appreciation of the recent seizures by the police service, of especially arms and ammunition across the country. And I put it in the context like this. There is in the legislation this matter of tipping. And I think it's a very important aspect of this legislation because I feel that so many of police raids have failed because of the tipping that has gone on. And tipping off that has gone on. And Madam Speaker, the situation about tipping off is all over the country. In every police station, you will find some errant policeman who is guilty of this particular kind of behavior. I think this bill is not about the punishment of crime as much as it wants to focus on the prevention of crime. But as I said, I do not know, I'm not sure that laws, as we are passing them, are really dissuading people by increasing fines. Now, what I like to suggest to the government is this. Very few people in this country remember what laws we pass. Very few people take our laws seriously. They just continue their way of life and their errant way of life. And I think that one of the things I would want to encourage the Minister of National Security to do is immediately upon the passing of this law to engage in a tremendous public relations exercise that brings to the notice of people what these laws are saying. In other words, you do, as part of your program of public education for the members of the public, but also as part of your induction programs for existing police officers, customs officers, immigration officers, as well as, Honorable Minister, as well as in terms of where they work. So in the immigration department, for example, you can have a sign indicating that if you bribe an immigration officer or what have you, this is what you're subject to. I think that we have to go the full gamut of preventative action. And I think that's one of the areas that we are failing in communicating what we are doing in this parliament with respect to the public. I really think so. I think on buses, for example, which are outfitted with videos, you can actually play videos showing what these fines are. Yes. You can do this. You can probably give PTSC some money and reduce their dependency on the Treasury by paying them to put on the side of their buses real advertisements about, what kinds of things are subject. In the schools, you can introduce to the students in their homework period, as it were, where they discuss some of these public issues, if they still do. You can introduce them to the legislation. You see, you do not wait until people become adults for them to become errant. You have to deal with them when they're very young and fashion their minds at that particular stage. I remember when we were students in schools, and I guess my colleague, Mr. Ramada, would remember this, we had a subject called civics. Yes. Civics. Wilfred D. Best. That's right, Wilfred D. Best. And Wilfred D. Best, sorry. And in that, we used to discuss all of these kinds of public issues. And we knew about the law, and we knew who were the ministers, and we knew, and so on. So I think that is important. Madam Speaker, it bothers me, therefore, why so many persons who are charged with the responsibility to protect and serve or to monitor and ensure compliance themselves are breaking the law. What it is that has gone wrong that's causing these people to break the law? Are they under economic pressure to do so? Are their lives being threatened and they're being forced to break the law? Are they living beyond their means? I do believe that there are many people who are living beyond their means in this country. I don't think people are really budgeting as they should budget and live within their means. Madam Speaker, you're probably going to have a laugh at this, but while I was growing up, my father used to want me to remember that we came from a very poor background. And he used to tell me you must have only 2 pairs of shoes, a brown and a black, to suit the different clothes you wore. And that was an interesting thing. It's always remember that, and I really don't own more than about 3 pairs of shoes. Simply because of that he told me. Madam Speaker, you see, I'll tell you something. In the Hindu scriptures, which I preach, I've been preaching for about 52 years, that's not known. There is a verse in the sacred scripture of the Bhagavad Gita, which is used in the courts for people to swear upon. And there's a verse there in chapter 6, in which the Lord is asked a question as to what is that satanic force that drives a man to do that which he knows to be wrong, but he still does it against his own best judgment. And the answer that comes from the Lord is very simple. It is greed. Greed is that satanic force. And a lot of what is happening in our country is due to greed. People are not content to work hard and to work honestly. And therefore, greed is what is corrupting this country. And what we are discussing here is important. But at the end of the day, only self-control will lead to a higher standard of living. You see, Madam Speaker, what we are discussing here in the Parliament today is about not law per se, but about ethics. Ethics. You have law which can be enforced, but ethics can't be enforced upon anyone. Ethics is the unenforceable, and man has to enforce ethics upon himself. And we are failing to teach ethics in this society. We are failing to live.
Madam Speaker, this is a wonderful discourse for another time and place, but standing order 48-1, please.
Member Fatabiki.
Yes, Madam Speaker.
Member Fatabiki.
Yes.
Okay, so I'd ask you, I like the foundation that you have laid, and I'll ask you to tie it back to what you're doing, please. Thank you.
So, Madam Speaker, the legislation is important because it was the Commissioner of Police who, just on March 20th, 2019, revealed something that was so distressing to me as a citizen. When he said that the state was footing a $50 million bill for 300 suspended cops still being paid. Right? Now, this legislation attempts to probably prevent cops from breaking the law or taking bribes or what have you. But to have a police service of about 6,500 and 300 of your policemen are still being paid, they are on suspension, tells you about the magnitude of the problem. For whatever reason, they are on suspension. I'm very happy recently I'm seeing the Professional Standards Bureau doing a very good piece of work in terms of number of policemen who are being brought before the courts. But I think it's important. So what the Commissioner of Police is really saying is that over $500 million had been paid in relation to suspended officers over a 10-year period. That's a lot of money, a lot of money. And then in the laws we are dealing with here today speak about customs. And we had a case on August 4, 2019 of a customs clerk being fined $35,000 for $0.5 million in cocaine. Madam Speaker. So whether it's customs, whether it's police, or whether it's prisons. And then you have another situation where Wednesday, 27 March 2019 in The Guardian, Venezuelans claim immigration officers in rackets, bribes to stay in Trinidad and Tobago. So if it is these are the things that the attempt is being made to stymie or to stop, then I can understand that. But Madam Speaker, in the legislation itself, I'm concerned about legislation versus prosecution. I'm really concerned. So the customs officers did their jobs well, and they found containers that contained goods that should not have been there. For example, recently, somewhere up in Trin City area, a container was found with illicit drugs and what have you. Then in South Trinidad, in a container, I think, containing chicken, marijuana was also found. What has happened to those cases? What has happened to those cases? Have they been prosecuted? Have people been fined? So what is the sense of trying to get the customs officers to do their work when they follow through in order to support the work of the customs officers is not being there, Madam Speaker. So I think that is very, very important. The other thing that I didn't see here in the legislation, but it's probably implied, is how customs officers deal and check about invoicing of goods. There's a lot of talk in this country about under-invoicing of goods that come to Trinidad. And as a result of that, we are losing revenue in the country because of under-invoicing. And in fact, if you look at the draft estimates of revenue for the financial year, you would see that the amount of money collected under excise duties by the Controller of Customs and Excise fell by about $100 million in 2019. So is that because people are buying less, or it's under-invoiced? And I think that is something that has also to be looked at. Madam Speaker, in the legislation, in section 55(2), it says here, by increasing the penalty where a police officer is dismissed from the police service or resigns his office or otherwise leaves the police service, fails to deliver up every article which has been supplied to him at public expense and which he has not been expressly authorized to keep or use for his private benefit. Of course, the fines have been increased. Now, if a police officer, as the member for Toko Sanigrani could correct me, if a police officer is dismissed from the police service or resigns or otherwise leaves, whose responsibility is it to ensure that all the paraphernalia, including the badge and the gun and so on, all of this is returned to the service? If it's not being returned, then the police service has to look at the administrative deficiency involved. And I feel it's an administrative deficiency that is causing this to happen. And is this the reason why some police, we have the accusation in the country that police guns are being rented out, or police uniforms are seen on people? And talking about police uniforms, I didn't see anything here in the legislation that speaks about fining people who might be found guilty of printing these particular police uniforms. You know, because it seems to me that somebody have to be printing these things. Somebody have to have access to the equipment to do this in the way that it's done. And as I say that, we have to make a distinction. The supplemental police, for example, how come sometimes you see they mark police, and I'm talking about, you know, security firms, that police is marked on their jersey. Well, I don't think that they should have police mark on their jersey, or there should be something that identifies them. So I think that is also to be looked at. But the administrative deficiency is, I think, something that that has to be dealt with. Now, in sections 57(3), the penalty is increased for a failure to deliver up any article which was supplied to a police officer who is now deceased for the execution of his office. Now, the question in my mind is, who is supposed to deliver up this article of the deceased police officer? So the wife probably doesn't know the police officer placed it somewhere in the house, and you know, it was not delivered up. And then the administrative they check and they haven't found. They go and they find it in the person's home. How are you going to deal with that? Are you going to charge the person in the home? Are you going to charge the deceased wife or son or daughter or what have you, or the caretaker of the home for that? I think that, you know, that raises a couple of issues in my mind. And it has been spoken about before, but the one about the penalty for refusal to assist the police officer, that to me is one that needs clarification. I know that the minister said when he spoke that you'll have to be careful that you don't put yourself in the line of danger in assisting the police officer. But how does that jive with a penalty for refusal to assist a police officer? Let's say a police officer is fighting a criminal, and the police, look, I want help, and calls upon, hey, you standing there, come and help me. And you're looking at a gun pointed at the police officer, and you are unarmed, and you don't know what to do. Reasonableness. Okay, if you say reasonableness. And then there's the section here, while a policeman is on duty, you know, the penalty is increased where a person knowingly harbors or entertains a police officer while he's on duty. Now, sells or gives intoxicating liquor to a police officer while he's in duty. What about a cup of coffee? What about a glass of juice? What about a bottle of water? No, it might sound facetious, But is it a good question? You know, can that be interpreted as entertaining a police while he's on duty? I understand the intoxicating liquor clearly, but I just raise it because, you know, what is this? Can a person be set up, and a policeman goes there and, you know, out of the good nature, the community police, come and have a cup of coffee, come and have a cup of juice or what have you. How do you deal with that? Then there's another one. A lot of police officers, good-naturedly, go out and ask for charity. They ask for charity during Christmas time, they give out hampers and so on. Should police officers be doing that in the context of Section 61? A new Section 61 which will provide for instances in which a police officer accepts a bribe, gratuity, perquisite, or reward for the neglect or non-performance of his duty. You know, does the police officer feel obligated, having gone out and collected something, and good-naturedly, and then has to go back now and perform duty to arrest that fellow or charge that fellow or what have you? You know, these are nuances in the legislation that, you know, might end up before a judge. and then what will happen? So I just wanted to raise some of these kinds of issues that exist here in the legislation, Madam Speaker. But Madam Speaker, you know, at the end of the day, I think that, you know, we ought not to ignore, while we deal with this law and increase the penalties, something that was said by the Director of Public Prosecutions when he complained about the lack of prosecutors to deal with matters and how long these matters take. You see, in my view, the longer these matters take before the court, the more brave people get. The more brave people get. And this is why the speeding up of the administration of justice is something that ought to be supported. And then the final thing I want to say is we had a judge recently, I believe, complaining about ineffective police prosecutors. And I think that is something that we ought to also turn. Right, but thank you, Madam Speaker. That's the end of my speech in any case.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to start by thanking everyone who's contributed sensibly to this debate over the course of the last few hours. I certainly didn't exclude a whole bench, but I excluded some of the contribution. Madam Speaker.
All members, lest I may be accused of not giving protection when protection is not asked for. And I do appreciate the banter, and certainly across the floor I appreciate the banter. In fact, I enjoy when you all display playful camaraderie, but I'd ask people to please observe the standing orders, lest I mistake camaraderie as something that needs my protection, even though not asked for. Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to start, Madam Speaker, by just addressing some of the issues that were raised this afternoon, lest they be left on the record unanswered. There was a lot of submission with respect to the prison service. In fact, at one stage, I started to wonder if the whole debate was going to turn into one with respect to the prison service. First of all, to put immediately to rest the falsehood and this fake narrative that the prison service is a stepchild or some part of national security that is being left behind. That certainly is not the case under this administration. In fact, the record and the public record very clearly reflects that the president, Mr. Seren Richards of the Prison Officers Association, has said very expressly, explicitly, and without any prompting whatsoever on a number of occasions that this is the most responsive government he's dealt with ever, and the Prison Officers Association. And what I'd also like to put on record is we've spent a lot of time, energy, resources, and given a lot of commitment to the prison services. And that is not only with respect to the prison officers, but most certainly with respect to, as they call it, their clients, and trying to reform the rehabilitative side of prisons and work along with them with that. It will be remiss of me, however, not to put on record that in a time of little, when we as a government have been prioritizing the money we have and trying to spread it amongst the prison service and other areas, that the former administration spent over $230 million in cash to buy a warehouse, which they converted into a prison that is probably twice the size of this room, but less than 1/10 the size of the whole premises that they paid over $230 million for. And that's the Eastern Correctional Rehabilitation Center. And I use that as one example, because if we had that $230 million now, the amount of work that we would have been able to do, for example, the reform that is currently taking place at the remand yard that was completely neglected over a period of time prior to this administration, we are getting that work done for less than $60 million. It has taken us this long, and to try and get it in that range when over $80 million was spent on a double fence, and I want to place it on record again, a fence that covers nothing. There's nothing in the middle of this fence. The fence protects absolutely nothing. But the former administration spent $80 million on that fence. And then to have the audacity of persons such as Naparima come here and suggest that no work is being done as the prisons is a complete falsehood. Another issue that was raised by the member for Naparima, who's not in the House, was about acting in positions. And this complaint that persons who are in the executive of the prison service are acting and they're not appointed. The Commissioner of Prisons, I'm happy to say, was appointed in a permanent post. With respect to the appointment of all of these officers, it is not within the purview of the government. It is not within the purview of the executive, unfortunately. It lies solely within the purview and the authority of the Public Service Commission. We've said that repeatedly in the House. We are pleading with them. It is not only the prisons, it's also in fire and other areas. I hope when we come to Parliament in the not too distant future to deal with amendments with respect to the police, the appointment of deputy commissioners of police, the same messaging will ring out in this House, because that is within our power as legislators, and we will get that done. So I place squarely on the record, Madam Speaker, that we reject outright, and there's absolutely no evidence to support under this administration that the prison service is being left behind or treated as any stepchild, and that is not even a connotation that one should use. Furthermore, to just replace on the record, as I started off by saying when I was piloting at the outset, this bill came about as a result of direct consultation between the then Minister of National Security, Minister Dillon, the Attorney General, and the officers of National Security and the Attorney General's office, along with the assistance of Minister Hines. So this bill came about as a result of that direct consultation. So there is absolutely no sidelining of the Prison Officers Association. The vetting of persons raised by the Member of Parliament for Couva South. The vetting of persons trying to enter the prison service, the police service, the Trinidad and Tobago Regiment is something that more attention is being placed upon. It is something where we're asking that we begin introducing, for example, polygraph testing, because you are right. There are instances of the elements of criminality making their way into the system. And also, whilst in the system, their long tentacles are surrounding. As we talk about the tentacles and where the tentacles of criminality go and the conversations with the criminal element, I also take the opportunity to warn us in this chamber that we should not allow ourselves, some of us who have left the precincts of the chamber, to fall into that category as well. And I'll leave it to Couva South to make sure to have that conversation with your colleagues as I do with mine. With respect to CCTV, It wasn't Marlene I was referring to. It was someone over on that side. All right. With respect to the CCTV, as I've said throughout, with the CCTV, we are upgrading the CCTV in the prison system. There is coverage, of course, from a national security perspective. I won't get into all of these issues. There was apparently some banter whilst I was out of the chamber a little earlier about grabbers and jammers. And my colleague, grabbers, jammers, and rammers.
Yes, we have
And I was told there was a lot of familiarity with grabbers, jammers, and rammers. Okay, thank you. Again, that is technology that is being utilized in the prison system, but it doesn't negate the need for the amendments we're making here today to deal directly with it, because as technology changes. A lot, Madam Speaker, was said over and over repeatedly by a number of the speakers that laws and penalties cannot win the fight on crime or the war on crime. There's absolutely no one on this side in the chamber who will dispute that. But as I continuously think, and I'm going to state it now whenever I hear that said in this chamber, I often wonder if members understand what is the purpose of us being in the chamber. What is the purpose of us as legislators being here? Our purpose as members of the House of Representatives, one of our main purposes, if not our priority purpose when we come to the House, is to pass law. So every time I hear this suggestion, well, you can't pass law, law not going to do, I wonder, so what is it, that we must just sit down and do nothing? We mustn't pass laws? This is good law. I'm happy to hear today that my friends on the opposite side are supporting it. I take that as a recognition on their behalves that this is good law and is law that is necessary in Trinidad and Tobago. We have said over and over repeatedly in a number of debates on other pieces of legislation, a lot of the work that we're doing that complements the passage of law. So for the member for Naparima to say that he wants to see improvement in the criminal justice system, we also want improvement in the criminal justice system. And that's why a lot of effort was spent by this administration through the Attorney General in bringing pieces of legislation that were directed to making there a more efficient criminal justice system. On the other hand, we're also working with the judiciary and other elements of the criminal justice system to improve the efficiency. I also smile whenever I sit here and hear the criticisms about crime, and you're not doing this and you're not doing that. And I'm always reminded every time I hear praise for the Commissioner of Police, I wonder to myself, by those on the other side, as they give that type of praise to the Commissioner of Police, if they forgot that over 12, 13 months ago, not a single one of them on that side rose to support the current Commissioner of Police. With respect to one of the last points made by the member for Tabaquit, and I suspect it was that it's been a long day, a long evening, and maybe a bit of drifting at the end. 2 points. The first is when the member for Tabaquit referred to 61A of the legislation before us, and he said he didn't say it facetiously. If a police officer is given a glass of water or some juice by someone, if they could be charged, lest any member of the public or any member of the media covering this falls for that. Section 61A says, a police officer who accepts a bribe, gratuity, a perquisite, or reward, whether pecuniary or otherwise, for the neglect or non-performance of his duty. So it is qualified, whether he wants to suggest someone can be bribed for a glass of water or orange juice. It is qualified by the second part, for the neglect or non-performance of his duty. So it's coupled, it must go hand in hand. Take this glass of water, turn your back whilst I rob this woman. So the police officer has to accept the water and then neglect his duty of protecting the woman who is about to be robbed. So that is a completely it is facetious. Let me just leave it at that. It is a facetious submission, yes. I was struggling to find the right parliamentary language, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much. The other, you would understand better. Madam Speaker, there was another point that I wanted to address that the member for Tabaquit made, but it slips me right now. I have taken on board his suggestion that what we do, not necessarily engaging on a PR campaign, but making sure that persons are aware. His suggestions are well taken, and we will look at that by putting up signs in the necessary places, warning persons of if they bribe or obstruct officers, what are the new penalties that would apply. Madam Speaker, as I come to a conclusion with respect to this bill that has taken us a few hours, I'd just like to give everyone notice that there is one amendment I'd like to propose. We will be proposing on this side in the committee stage, and it is a very simple amendment. It is really to add rehabilitation centers, which are specific entities that have come up under the children's suite, the suite of legislation dealing with children. We would like to add that at clause 3, where we've listed the various prisons and correctional facilities. We'll be asking for the inclusion of a new I, and we'll be adding the rehabilitation centers. So, Madam Speaker, I would like to thank everyone for their contributions today, the sensible and reasonable ones, for all those on this side who contributed, but as an important qualification. And with those few words, Madam Speaker, I beg to move.
Honorable members, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Criminal Law Act, Chapter 1004, the Prisons Act, Chapter 1301, the Police Service Act, Chapter 1501, the Immigration Act, Chapter 1801, the Fire Service Act, Chapter 3550, and the Customs Act, Chapter 7801, be now read a second time. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Clerk.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Criminal Law Act, Chapter 1004, the Prisons Act, Chapter 1301, the Police Service Act, Chapter 1501, the Immigration Act, Chapter 1801, the Fire Service Act, Chapter 3550, and the Customs Act, Chapter 7801.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 68-1, I beg to move that the miscellaneous provisions Law Enforcement Officers Bill 2019 be committed to the Committee of the Whole.
Honorable members, the question is that the miscellaneous provisions Law Enforcement Officers Bill 2019 be committed to the Committee of the Whole. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. This House will now go into the Committee of the Whole to consider the bill clause by clause. Do 1 and 2 together, 3 alone, and then 4 to 7? Yes? Okay, thank you.
Clauses 1 and 2.
The question is that clauses 1 and 2 stand part of the bill. The question is that clauses 1 and 2 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clauses 1 and 2 now stand part of the bill.
Clause 3.
The question is that clause 3 now stand part of the bill. Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, as I had previously indicated, it is our proposal that we amend Clause 3 to add a new Clause I after H that reads rehabilitation centers, semicolon.
Whip? All right, so the question is that clause 3 be amended as circulated. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The question is that clause 3 as amended now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
Clauses 4 to 7.
The question is that clauses 4 to 7 stand part of the bill. The question is that clauses 4 to 7 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clauses 4 to 7 now stand part of the bill. Honorable members, the question is the bill as amended be now reported to the House. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This committee meeting is now adjourned. The House will resume. The Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I wish to report that the Miscellaneous Provisions Law Enforcement Officers Bill 2019 was considered in the Committee of the Whole and approved with an amendment. I now beg to move that the House agree with the committee's report.
Honorable members, the question is that this House agree with the committee's report on the Miscellaneous Provisions Law Enforcement Officers Bill 2019. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Minister of National Security.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Criminal Law Act, Chapter 1004, the Prisons Act, Chapter 1301, the Police Service Act, Chapter 1501, the Immigration Act, Chapter 1801, the Fire Service Act, Chapter 3550, and the Customs Act, Chapter 7801, be forthwith read a third time and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Criminal Law Act, Chapter 1004, the Prisons Act, Chapter 1301, the Police Service Act, Chapter 1501, the Immigration Act, Chapter 1801, the Fire Service Act, Chapter 3550, and the Customs Act, Chapter 7801, be forthwith read a third time and passed. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Criminal Law Act, Chapter 1004, the Prisons Act, Chapter 1301, the Police Service Act, Chapter 1501, the Immigration Act, Chapter 1801, the Fire Service Act, Chapter 3550, and the Customs Act, Chapter 7801.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move that this House do now adjourn to Friday, the 15th of November at 1:30 p.m.
Honorable members, the question is that this House do now adjourn. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? I've put the question. Okay, so maybe you can ask the question after. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it.
Speaker, just for the Leader of Government Business, what will we be doing next Friday, please?
Madam Speaker, that will be communicated to the leader, to the Chief Whip, within the correct time to comply with the standing orders. And that will be done very early. Thank you very much.
This House now stands adjourned to Friday, 15th November 2019 at 1:30 p.m.